The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is May 29th, 2022, and we are nearing the end of our zazenkai today, our more or less all-day sitting. And what has been vastly in the news, many articles about it, right up front at the top of the news, is about this school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, by this young man whose interesting name was Salvador, which means savior. Salvador was a loner, that much is known. It's also known that he was bullied, that people didn't like him, and oddly enough, and unfortunately, perhaps it may have given him the idea, but he was also taunted as a school shooter. This was way before he did it, but he lived with his grandmother because it didn't work out living with his mother. Neighbors had said that when he was living with his mother and the man that his mother was living with, nobody knew whether it was his father or who. There was a lot of shouting and screaming in the house, coming from the house. And once Salvador was sent to live with his grandmother, and I don't know what age that was, the shouting stopped. So it says something about his early childhood. His mother is rumored to be into drugs. It's known now in neurology and in trauma research that a child's brain is impacted by trauma. And one of the most critical things that can happen to a child to turn him into, well, somebody like Salvador, to cause trauma in the child's life is what are known as adverse childhood experiences. When a baby is born, it learns how to be, how to interact with the world, how to interact with people, how to feel, actually, and what to do with their feelings by its interaction with its primary caregiver. And if the caregiver is caring, responsive to the child, then the child grows up generally happy and adjusted to life. If the caregiver is not there for the child, whether it's because they're addicted or whether it's because they were taken away for some reason or because they're mentally ill, or there are many reasons why this can happen. If there's not somebody else to fill that role, the child grows up, well, there are several formats. One is psychopathic, one is sociopathic, and at the least, a troubled child growing into a troubled adult. And this apparently is the background for Salvador, who finally vented his frustration and rage, first by shooting his grandmother, who at the moment it appears is still surviving. She was able to call police and was airlifted and is in serious condition in a hospital right now. I don't know where his grandfather was, presumably at work. And then he took off with his two brand new guns and his brand new flak vest that also had the capacity to hold many more rounds of ammunition. And he must have been a little bit hyper at the time, I would think so. probably a big shot of adrenaline to kill his grandmother, or to try to kill his grandmother. And that he actually wrecked his car. He had an accident. He ran into an abutment as he got to the school, but he emerged in his vest with his guns, and a teacher had just propped open a door. South Texas, hot. And so he was able to just walk into the school and proceeded to mow down 19 children and 2 teachers. The police arrived, but and the Justice Department has announced that they're investigating this now. Didn't do anything, but waited for basically, I think what it would be called a SWAT team to come in to deal with the situation. And eventually, Border Patrol officers who were specially trained arrived and killed Salvador. Why am I bringing this up in a Zen talk? Because of this. We are taught, Zen teaches, that everyone is perfect, whole, and complete, lacking nothing, endowed with compassion and wisdom. But, as you heard in the beginning of this teisho, if that is not opened up to, then things happen. We who do zazen, at the end of this sitting, this extended sitting, every day in sesshin and at other times, we recite the Bodhisattva Vows, the vows of a Bodhisattva. A Bodhisattva is a being, a human being, usually, not always, who has chosen to come to awakening for the benefit of all beings, so that suffering may be relieved. The Dalai Lama regularly says, prays really, vows that may he be reborn endlessly until all beings are completely free of suffering. And in essence, that's what we're all committing to when we take these vows. It starts with working on ourselves, because it's impossible to do anything in an ongoing way to help other people beyond relatively superficial means, unless we ourselves are let go enough not to create more problems. Backtracking to Salvador, it's known through studies that when people grow up, children grow up in adverse conditions, there's always one person who's been there for and supported and cared for and clearly was there for any child who grows up not to end up in the prison system, not to end up murdering people, not to end up in a very bad place. We have the potential to be that person over and over again. Ultimately, hopefully, until all beings are free of suffering. We take this vow. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them. It doesn't mean to go out and try to proselytize. It doesn't mean to go out and grab people and say, hey, come on, let me show you how to meditate. It'll really be great. No. These sentient beings are our thoughts, our attachments, our caught places, as Chi-san fondly calls them. And it's in seeing where we're caught that we can begin to liberate ourselves from those caught places. In other words, liberate sentient beings from our own mind, which is how the sixth patriarch put it. It involves deep, ongoing zazen. It involves the courage, which we all have really. Don't kid yourself. The courage to take a look and not to look away from the clarity that can come, that can reveal where we are caught. One of the things that is classic in Zen practice, and Shinryu Suzuki nailed it in Zen mind, beginner's mind, when he talked about mind weeds that come up and how to use them as fertilizer. He called it manure. That's what the traditional fertilizer always was. For our practice, we can use it to fertilize our practice. And in the old days, Zen was taught like this in America. It came out of the Japanese culture, which is very, very focused and striving, and very different from the American culture. Focus is a wonderful tool. It's important. And as we do our zazen, we work to focus. We work to focus on the physical experience. We're exploring the subtle energies of being. And as we explore, we become more aware of those subtle energies, and we become more aware of how we are behaving and how we have behaved in the past. These are the mind weeds. These are the places where we have a choice. We could turn away from recognizing, oh my God, I didn't realize I spoke in that tone of voice. I didn't realize I was coming from this nasty place. I didn't realize, etc., etc., etc. When we are willing to open to and embrace the full catastrophe, as has been said, of the experience, sink into the sensations of remorse, regret that come up with the recognition, the clear seeing of those behaviors. That is an enormous step forward to letting go the habit patterns that brought them about to begin with. What happens then, in my experience, is that when we see clearly where we have been acting in a particular way, for example, and we own it, we open to the uncomfortable feeling of having behaved in that way. Then the next time circumstances would arise where we would automatically indulge in that behavior again, it's almost as if a flashing red light comes up in front of us and says, blink, 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 blink. Do you really want to do this again? And it's easy not to. And it may come up another couple of times, but each time it's weaker when our synapses, when our brain function is not repeated in certain areas, then the connections begin to weaken and die out. This is why, use it or lose it is quite accurate in terms of mental functioning. This is why Mitra-roshi, who lived in Japan for 11 years, and no, more than that, and was translating for his teacher in Japan once he learned Japanese, and then translating for Mitra-roshi when he came to Rochester Zen Center decades later, at 90, said to one of his senior students, "I think I used to be a translator of Japanese." Clearly, he realized that he didn't remember Japanese anymore and couldn't do it anymore. That's a poignant expression of use it or lose it. And of course, he didn't have any reason to use Japanese once the Japanese teachers were not coming to the States anymore. But it's the same for our negative habit patterns too. Use it or lose it. If we don't use it, if we don't indulge in it, then it fades. The impetus to indulge in it begins to disappear. But it takes a commitment to do that. And this is what is called the long maturation in Zen. Torii Enji spoke of it eloquently and was very, 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 he felt it was a very, very important aspect of Zen practice, and so do I. In fact, you can bring yourself to Kensho through sheer determination and focus, and a narrow focus. And I've seen that happen in the past, in the old days. And it happened by ignoring these mind weeds when they cropped up. And the result was that the people who had those kenshos and were able to go on and go through subsequent koans, to some degree at least, ended up having done quite a few koans, but the mind weeds were still there. And their behavior was still just as caught in greed, anger, and delusion as it was before they ever had a kensho. So you can have the most impressive kensho in the world, as Hakuin thought he had when he had his first kensho. But until and unless you do this work, this inner work of continuing to open to where you're caught and to own it, to feel it, and to really commit not to behaving like that again, nothing's going to change. You may have some notches in your belt for whatever koans you've done, but if you're still the same caught person in greed, anger, and delusion, what is the point other than your own ego aggrandizement? And this brings us around to the more we can let go in our own being, the more we are actually able to be there for hurting people. And perhaps, and this is kind of wild thing to say, but perhaps prevent another school shooting, perhaps prevent another murder, perhaps prevent another suicide. Those of us who come to Zen practice and repeat the Bodhisattva vows have taken upon ourselves a responsibility to take this practice so deep, never ceasing, until all beings are liberated. That means all the crappy places in our own way of being that actually then spreads out and influences and impacts in positive ways many other beings. And we are drawn as well from that clear mind to doing work that is freeing of human beings. Even if you're not a therapist or a doctor or a nurse or somebody like that in the so-called helping professions, just being able to be with a suffering person in a free and caring way makes an enormous difference. And I can tell you about my first experience with that. Well, not my first, because my first was with my father and then with my grandmother. But when I was 16 years old, I was in great deal of mental emotional pain. Life was traumatic at that point. It had been traumatic for some time. And I ended up with appendicitis and in a local hospital. One day, I think the second day I was in the hospital, the first night I spent in the hallway because it was overcrowded. But the next day, the doctor came in, the surgeon came in and insisted that I stand up so he could talk to me, upon which I fainted, and he threw me into bed, slapped me awake, made me look at the incision, which was no big deal. From my end of it, I wasn't going to freak out looking at a stitched up wound. But the result was that I fell asleep then deeply, and I woke up in the middle of the night when there was nothing to do, and the cleaning lady came in to clean the floors, and she saw I was awake. She had this wonderful, wonderful sense about her. She just was quiet and humble, and she offered me a True Confessions magazine, which you have to know was utterly forbidden in my house. My mother would have freaked if she'd known about it. But just the gesture of caring that this woman had really, really touched me deeply. And I will never forget that. I have no idea who she was, what her name was, or anything else. And I never saw her again after that night. But that simple gesture of caring for a teenage girl and offering her something that teenage girls read, except I didn't, it was deeply touching. There are ways, just by our being, let go, that we can offer compassion and wisdom into the universe. And it's known too that with these discovery of the mirror neurons, it's figured out why and how people do feel how other people are feeling around them. It's a known fact. And so the more we are let go, the more we are opening to our own innate compassion and wisdom, the more we are able to offer loving kindness towards ourselves, the more that radiates out to other people. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them. Clinging is inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to it. It is clinging to this idea of being somebody that is of some description instead of allowing ourselves to flow with life's circumstances. We become rigid and stuck in this idea of who we are. And this is what happened with this young Salvador. Bullied relentlessly, apparently, not apparently having gotten the loving attention from his mother when he was small. And he acted out. He was caught in being somebody who was unloved, in being somebody that nobody liked because they told him so, in being somebody that there was nobody there for him. And out of his pain, he killed so many children and their teachers and tried to kill his own grandmother. So I hope you consider this, and I hope it inspires your zazen to deepen, because we do have a responsibility. And this is not to hold a sword of Damocles over our head or anything, but to say that we are sensitive enough, those of us who are drawn to Zazen, that there's some spark in us that wants to be free and wants others to be free, that cares. And to manifest that caring in everything you do or say or think, this is what we work towards opening to the innate capacity in ourselves to do through our Zazen. So I don't think there's anything really much more to say about this, but we'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. Thank you for listening.